Guys, here we are in a 8 or 9 Rubicon 4-door with a V8. What's different about this V8 is it's a Hemi. It's a Hemi 6.1 SRT. And a lot of you know that we've been specializing in LS installations for many, many years. Actually, we started working on them in 2008. But we also work in Hemis. We have a lot of customers with Hemis. Recently, we've done 3 Hemi to LS swaps, but we also service Hemis like we're doing with this one. And if I had not had all the miles on an LS JK that I do have, I would think that this Hemi was an excellent swap, and it's not a bad swap. Compared to a V6, any V8, Hemi or LS, is vastly superior in my opinion, and it's vastly superior to any supercharger or turbocharger. The LS and the Hemi do drive significantly different. What a lot of it comes down to is the transmission. The early 5 speeds really are a letdown in my opinion. Their shifting logic does not make a lot of sense. You might go to accelerate and it will upshift. It just doesn't make sense sometimes. The converters feel loose. You've got to spin these things up. You look here, just trying to accelerate lightly. The tack's loose. The LS is a lot tighter. You give it a little bit of throttle and the vehicle moves a proportional amount. The other thing is the 6L80 and now the 8L90s will keep the revs very low all the time. We're cruising down the road at 40 miles an hour in this Hemi at 1800 RPM. And in LS you're going to be down there at about 1,000, 1,100. The other thing is the idle. You'll notice that the Hemi idles 700-ish, the LS will idle at about 5. So everything about the LS is more docile, more tame than the Hemi. There's a little bit of rumble at idle that I can feel right now, but I'm not here to talk bad about the Hemi. It is an excellent swap. In my opinion, it just does not have the drivability, the durability, or the longevity that an LS would have. The LS engines obviously are GM's mainstay, and engines like the LS3 have gone the distance in racing, and truck engines like the 5.3 and the 6.0 have gone hundreds of thousands of miles trouble-free. They're just a great series of engines. And if I had a JK and I could not afford a V8 swap and I got a really good deal on a Hemi, I would put it in. Of course, my first choice would be an LS, but if I didn't have an option to buy the LS, I'd put a Hemi in. It vastly improves the JK. And with a little bit of ingenuity, the Hemi installation is not that difficult. Now, there are hardware modifications you have to do with the Hemi that traditionally you don't have to do with the LS. But there's also electronic integration you have to do in the LS that you don't have to do with the Hemi. So it's somewhat of a trade-off. In my opinion, the smaller, lighter, more compact LS cools better, drives better, especially with the 6 and 8 speed transmissions. And overall, after driving one for a while, if you got back into a Hemi, it would feel like a throwback. It would feel like you're going back into the 1980s or 90s with that technology. With the LS, you feel like you're driving a Denali or a Mercedes. It just feels more refined, quieter, smoother. It's a difficult perception to convey. However, the Hemi swap is not a bad swap. If somebody gives you a Hemi or you get a smoking deal at a Hemi, go for it. Now, be careful if you're in an emissions area, because traditionally what they do with Hemis is they take a 3.6 or a 3.8 PCM and patch in the Hemi engine performance, whether it's a 5.7 VVT, 6.1, 6.4. And what that does is it effectively ruins the Mode 6 data that's designed to monitor your emissions controls. So a lot of guys with Hemis, especially these early Hemi builds, are running into issues with emissions. They're running hacked and patched calibrations. They're not running pure calibrations like we run with the LSs. And the newer Hemi builds are coming around to full monitor support. but we're still helping some customers through that. In fact, this Jeep is one of them. So be careful if you're in an emissions county that's going to inspect your monitors. Make sure they're not turned off, make sure they're supported, and make sure all the trouble codes are there. Because essentially what you're running in these early Hemis is a patched calibration. This is a 6.1 Hemi, which is kind of an in-between year. And I'll be honest, the 6.1 was never my favorite Hemi. It really doesn't put power out till the top, which is not really what the JK needs. If I had to pick my favorite Hemi, it would be the 5.7 VVT, and then probably the 5.7 after that. I'm not a big fan of the 6.4 or the 6.1. I would try to source a good low mileage 5.7 VVT if you can afford it. But of course, in the long run, I would take an LS over any Hemi. You can get any amount of horsepower, you can run any kind of fuel you want. The size, weight, cooling, calibrations for the LSs, in my opinion, are far ahead of the Hemis. But the Hemi is still not a bad swap, and we work on a lot of Hemis, and we've been working on Hemis since 2008, just like we've been working on the LS since 2008. And I have over 100,000 miles in LS JKs, and if I didn't, I'd probably like this Hemi a lot more. But getting out of an LS with a 6-speed or an 8-speed and getting into this Hemi is definitely a step backwards for me. But if I had got out of a Pentastar or a 3.8 into this Hemi, it would be a huge leap forward. So what it comes down to is what your expectation and your budget is. And if somebody gives you, or you get a really good deal on a Hemi, go for it. You won't be disappointed. If you get into an LS, you're probably going to wish that you had gone that route. We've actually done quite a few Hemi to LS swaps, and most of it comes down to the transmission. But if you find that the Hemi suits your needs better than the LS, then go for it. So the bottom line is, we're going to stay with these LSs. I feel the drivability, the cooling, the size, the weight matches the JK much better than the Hemi does. The Hemi is a large engine, and the JK has a very small engine compartment. So when you try to stuff that Hemi into the JK, it doesn't leave a whole lot of room for airflow, crash protection, meaning crush zones. The LS just fits better. There's no modifications to the suspension if you run an all aluminum LS. There's no modifications to the battery tray in the earlier JKs. There's no moving the steering shaft on the firewall. You don't have to beef up the springs. There's just a whole host of hardware modifications that you don't have to do. If the Hemi is done right, you're going to have a good run in JK. If an LS is done right, you're going to have a great run in JK. They're definitely in the same league, but the drivability in the LS is superior in my opinion. So that's kind of my spiel on the Hemi. It's a good swap. It's just not as good as the LS in my opinion. And if you drive both of them side by side, I think you would feel what I'm talking about. There's a different sound, there's a different feel to the overall driving of the vehicle.